Okay, so this is a spotlight panel on Tauhid Bondia, who does Crabgrass for NCS Fest in 2021 for future people watching it, not necessarily when it airs. My name is Shena Wolf. I'm the director of comics and acquisitions at Andrews McMeel Syndication, and I'm talking to Tauhid today, and I'm really excited about it. So, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's really great.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Nice. I don't think I've ever seen you in person before. That's kind of cool.
It's true. I was thinking about that earlier today. Like you and I talk on the phone, so that's very normal. And then being on camera is a totally different thing. And I'm going to tell a small story that will make the audience feel like they're privy to secrets. I had to get a different headshot from you, and I noticed that it's just like a picture that you took 5 minutes before we are doing this panel because you're wearing the same shirt. So
yeah, I don't. Yeah, exactly. I don't do a lot of selfies or anything like that. So it's not surprising that the only picture that you could find before that was from like 5 years ago.
These things happen, like cameras are terrible and selfies are the worst. So that makes perfect sense to me. Okay, so we're going to talk for about half an hour and we're going to do kind of an overview of what your deal is and then the comic, and it'll be super fun and hopefully informative. So I think that this is a terrible question to ask people because there's not a great answer to it, but like, hey, what's your deal? Because it's the question underneath other questions, right? Like those are the kinds of things that you want to try to figure out when you start talking to somebody that you don't know very well. So I think for this particular audience, like you're a newer creator, even though you've been doing cartoons for a long time. So like what are the key things that you like people to know about you?
Oh gosh. There's not much I want people to know about me or that I need for people to know about me. I really just like try to put the work front facing. I just really, really love drawing comics and sharing them with as many people as I can. I've always just kind of been a fan of doing something cool. So people thought I was cool. And so this has just been really great that things have gone the way that they've gone. I've been able to do this for a living.
That's awesome. So how did you first get interested in comics?
Honestly, I don't have. Oh, you can hear that. That's dogs.
Don't worry about it. It's fine.
Yeah, no, honestly, we didn't have like newspapers or anything in our house when I was growing up. So I never really had that, reading the Sunday Funnies experience as a kid. But thinking back, I think probably my first memory with comic strips was around 4th or 5th grade. Our teacher would take us to the school library and we'd get to pick out a book. And a few of us figured out that it counted if you picked out one of the Garfield collections as a book. I'm not a huge fan of reading, but I loved those comic strips. And so I probably read every Garfield collection that way. But I didn't really get into comics, I think, until around 9th grade, when a friend of mine introduced me to Calvin and Hobbes. I was a freshman in high school. And he did get the newspaper at home. So he would actually take the Calvin and Hobbes strip, just that strip, out of the paper and paste it into a scrapbook that he made. And he let me borrow that. And I took it home one day and I fell head over heels. I had no idea that comics could be like that, Up to that point, my entire experience was those Garfield, which I love Garfield, but it was those Garfield collections and just like, Snoopy or Peanuts, Halloween specials, things like that,
Yeah.
So when I first set eyes on Calvin and Hobbes and Watterson's work, my mind was blown. And that was, I think, probably the first time I took the medium seriously and thought maybe I want to do this, I always enjoyed drawing, but up till then, I think I wanted to be a comic book artist more than a comic strip artist. That might have been where I made the turn.
Yeah, that was going to be like my next question. Have you always done art?
Yeah, long as I can remember. It kind of ran in my family. I was lucky about that because my mom was a little bit artistic, but an older cousin of mine was fantastic. And being able to just like sit and draw with him during those formative years really kind of cemented the desire to draw and get better, because he was so much better than me. And we would sit at the table and we would draw from the same magazine. And I would be really impressed with what I was doing. I thought it was so great. And then I would look at his and he just blew me out of the water. I was like, that's incredible that somebody can do that. I want to be able to do that. He taught me what he knew, and that just kind of cemented the whole idea. But that, yeah, ever since I was very small, I couldn't tell you when I even started drawing. I just always have.
That's really cool. So I sent you a list of 5 questions, and now I'm going slightly off script, but all of the things that I'm going to ask you are related to those questions. So I'm not like, no gotchas, like, oh no. So one of the things that you and I have talked, I suppose I should so a cool thing that we're able to talk about today is you have a strip called Crabgrass, and you and I have been working together to get it ready for print syndication, which is going to happen in 2022, which is super, super cool. And I'm very excited to be breaking this news at NCS Fest in this panel from the past, because we're recording this in August. But anyway, one of the things that you and I have talked about as we've done this process is you getting more comfortable with your writing. So how have you worked on that as a person who is very comfortable with the art piece of it?
I think I've just kind of tried to take it to another level. I've always just relied on my innate talent or aptitude for a thing, being good enough. But I think probably this is the first project. This is the longest I've ever worked on a comic strip project. And this is probably the first project where I've decided, okay, whatever ability I have innately is not going to be enough. I need to get better. So, I've been reading books and things like that, and about story writing, and really just kind of taking my time and planning a little bit more. Just to try and hit the beats and make an actual arc and focus on character development and things like that. I still feel like I'm in my floaties, but I think it'll get there. It'll get a lot better. And not to say that it was terrible to begin with, but it's just I think I do like the progress that I'm making on that front.
Yeah, and just cheap plug, people can read the strip right now at gocomics.com/Crabgrass. So how did Crabgrass come together as a concept for you?
There were a few things happening at once. I had worked, my last paying gig at the time was, I was working for Wet Pumpkin, Andrew Hussey's company that he built around his webcomic Homestuck. And I was working as a graphic designer / web designer / toy designer / animator, just doing all kinds of stuff and having a blast. But then the company got sold, and I got laid off. And this is probably the long version of the story.
That's okay. You can tell the long version of the story.
Okay, so I got laid off, and I thought, well, you know what? It's time to go pro with this graphic design business. Because prior to that, I'd always worked as a graphic designer, but in a sort of a local capacity. Around my town, there were graphic tee shops that needed artists and things like that. And I thought, I'm gonna see if I can do the big boy version of this, even though I don't personally have a degree or anything. I just have years and years of experience. But I guess that wasn't as enticing to any graphic design firms in Louisville or anything like that. So I couldn't get any callbacks. And I was getting to the end of my unemployment benefits. And I had been working on a comic called A Problem Like Jamal as a sort of a creative outlet at the time. And it was getting to the point where I was just going to have to take a job to contribute to the household. And so I told my wife, I was like, look, I can do this. I can go just get a job and, work on my comics on the side. And she said, if you want, you can just devote yourself full time to your comic strips and make it happen. And I thought, okay, I'll try that. Wow, that's awfully incredible and supportive of you. And that evening we sat down and I pitched her a few ideas for comic strips. And the one that floated to the top was about two little boys who were best friends. And I think it was her idea that the comic strip be set in the late 80s, early 90s, or Jessica. And that weekend I banged out 20 strips that I then sent to you. So it all happened really fast, just kind of immediately. And then, everything else was history. But yeah, conceptually, I didn't even realize I was doing something semi-autobiographical until I was like on the 10th strip. And then I was like, oh, wait, this is me. And then I got really excited about it.
I will say the stuff you sent in was so strong. Like, it was such a great first package. It made sense immediately. I think that I reached out pretty quickly after you sent it. And it's one of those things where I have been fortunate enough to see some of those kinds of packets come in and just immediately go like, yep, this is going to be amazing. And we're totally going to do it. And this was one of those times. And so that was really cool for me, just as a person who loves comics and loves reading comics. So it's also really, because I used to read, like, We Have a Problem Like Jamal and Go Comics also. And it's just such a different thing. So it's really interesting to me that so many people who do comic strips have had so many different versions. Like, they've had different projects, and those projects, there's always a through line because you're the same person making it. But the work in A Problem Like Jamal is so different than the stuff in Crabgrass.
Yeah.
Like the art style, the writing style, all of it is very, very different.
I've always experimented with different art styles in different projects. The longer I do the project, you see more of my personal style sort of evolving into it. But I'm always kind of ambitious with a new art style whenever I start a new project. But yeah, that A Problem Like Jamal obviously had a very different purpose. It was just pure artistic expression at a time when I was really anxious about a lot of things after the presidential election and things like that. So Crabgrass, I think, was more about getting back to my roots, and it was intentionally more, I think, whimsical and meant to be digested by a wider audience, I guess.
Mm-hmm. So for people who are watching this who are not as familiar with Crabgrass, as you've said, it's mostly focused on two small boys who live next to each other in a neighborhood. It's set in kind of an ambiguous past time that is still very recognizable, especially to people in their, I would say, like late 30s into early 50s. Like, it's a very familiar setting, so that we don't tell stories on how old either one of us is, like your range. And there's also a lot of stuff about class, and there's some stuff about race, and it does remind me very much of Calvin and Hobbes. There's a lot of stuff in the school situation, and then also like adventures in the woods. What's been your favorite thing as you've gotten into doing the comic that maybe you like? Is there something that you didn't expect to really dig into, or are there elements of it that you're particularly fond of or proud of?
I think probably my favorite thing to play with is the sort of dynamic of young friendship. It's really easy to write jokes around and tell stories around and things like that. It's really easy to do that, but I also like to try and reflect what, for me anyways, my experience of childhood friendship was. And there's actually a lot of toxic elements to that. Kids can be really possessive of each other, and then they can be kind of rude to each other and things like that. And it's all jokes and everything in the comic strip, but that stuff is there too. I like to, but then, kids get into fights and they fuss, and then they have really short memories and they make up. That's also, I think, kind of reflective of actual childhood friendship. I just really like capturing that in the dynamic between Kevin and Miles. The social stuff kind of leaks in there. I never really intend to put that in, but I can't not put it in. I can't seem to escape it. I think it's just a part of my voice or whatever. But yeah, I mean, that, and I like the idea of just doing a strip that took place in my childhood, because I don't have to try to pretend like I know how kids are today, or that, the experience of youth is somehow universal across all ages and eras. It's not. And so I'm kind of writing from what I know, which is, if that answers your question.
Yeah, totally. It's also, you have different ages of children in the strip. So like Kevin's family, he has a baby brother and he has a twin sister and he has an older brother, and all of them are dealing with stuff in very different ways. So when you have the kids interact, it's clear that these are not like, there's no universal template for children in your work. Like these are children at different phases who are reacting to things in specific ways. And so like the slightly older one is remembering the stuff that the slightly younger ones are dealing with. And then the youngest one is like the most innocent. And it's just really cool to see all of those things come together. And you're very good at differentiating voices. So all of your characters are specific characters. It isn't like, this is the parent template, this is the teacher template, like this is, like children talk like this kind of stuff. So that's, I think, something that has really come out the more you've done the strip and as the cast has kind of expanded.
That is a good point. I try to, and that's something that comes out obviously the longer that you work on something, because all of these characters were, I guess, more two-dimensional earlier in the strip. They were kind of working from archetypes. And I really thought that Kevin was going to be the star of the strip because he's the Calvin from Calvin and Hobbes archetype. He's this rambunctious and always getting in trouble. And he was very easy to write to because that's a very thorough trope. But as time went on, learning to play with Miles's sort of neurotic nature became more fun and interesting to make jokes around and have him interact with. And also it's just as different as they are, the fact that they're so tight and I get to do these heartwarming friendship moments between them. It just feels good to write, and it's really fun.
Yeah, I think the dynamic when it first started out was more Kevin was very chaotic and Miles was more of a straight man. And it was one of those challenges to try to make sure that, because straight man characters are really important, but for him specifically, I remember the process of like you making him weirder and not coming out in the ways that they were interacting, because as it turns out, you can have two very different personality types and they can both be really interesting. And all of that can come out. So that's been really fun to watch. I also, since it is something that like you and I have been working on, and I'm privy to all of these secrets, there was also a point at which you have been subtly redesigning the way that you draw them over the course of the entire thing. And then there was a point at which you really wanted to change it. And I was not super excited about it because I thought that they looked adorable and I didn't want you to change it. But then like you did it and I was very relieved because you were like, I think I liked it better before. And I was like, I didn't have to do anything. I just watched this process unfold and it was perfect. But I think that willingness to experiment with it is a really great thing as like just for a creative person to be open to that stuff. And so you're never so precious with the things that you've come up with that you're not willing to see where they go. That's just a story about how sometimes my job involves doing nothing, but it's been really cool to watch it come together. So like for me, reading it is delightful and I have very minimal notes at this point, but like, what's your favorite thing about reading comics now? Like as a person who's making comics, like how has that changed how you engage with comics as a form?
Don't do it. I don't read comics now. It's bad for me. Mostly because it's such a strong influence on my inspiration and even my work. I read a handful of comics by people who I am personally, personally friends with, Mm-hmm. But comics at large, when I started really working on Crabgrass and trying to hone it into its own thing, my reading of other comics just dropped off precipitously because I kept having ideas and realizing where I got them from, thinking they were my ideas. And then I would post them on Ghost Comics or Instagram. And then somebody would make a comment that this is just like such and such episode of such and such comic. And I thought, I don't want to be doing that too much. I know it's unavoidable because there's so many comics out there and everybody's already done everything. But I just want to be working from a fresher pool of ideas. So I don't read comics that much anymore, but I do enjoy comics. I love comics, one of my favorite things about them is probably just that they're short. because I have a very, very short attention span and I read slowly. So, books and things like that, it's just way too much of a commitment. I will power my way through a really, really good book, but I'm not somebody who just devours books and hopes that it's good by the time I'm halfway through it. And, even comic books, it's really, when I read comic books as a kid, it was really hard for me to get involved in a long drawn out involved storyline. I was basically just tracking artists that I liked, and whatever books they were working on and looking at the pictures essentially. But comic strips were always short, 4 panels, 3 panels, 1 panel, boom, you're done. And that gives you momentum to read the next comic. And then next thing I know, I looked up and I just finished a whole 100-something page book of comics. It just was effortless. It is really a good match for my style of media consumption, I guess. And also I think that it's interesting that, that short form, that short format applies a certain kind of limitation to the creator. You have to hit that punchline in the end. You have to recap the story in the first panel. So when you're trying to tell a story like that, it sort of breeds creativity. You have these limitations to work around, and there's a lot of shorthand that's created in comic strips that comic strip readers understand and comic strip creators understand. Somebody coming from outside might not readily get it. But yeah, I like that unique aspect too of comics as well.
I think the thing that you're mentioning about the momentum that comic strips have, I think that's tied into the very specific language of comic strips. So you don't have to know what that language is when you start reading comic strips, because you will pick it up as you go. Like it's kind of a format that teaches you how to read it as you're reading it, which is kind of fascinating, because superhero comics are not necessarily known for taking you by the hand and helping you figure out what is happening in any particular scene. Do you have a favorite thing about creating comics? Like, is there a part of the process that you like the best, or a thing that you are most happy to see when it's done?
Probably finishing. Just because I have aphantasia. If you're familiar with that, I don't have the ability to conjure a mental image. And, all my life when people would say, imagine you're at the beach, or picture an apple, I thought that meant think really hard about the beach, or just mentally list all the things that about an apple. And I've never been able to conjure a mental image. And I didn't discover that until probably a couple of years ago. And it was weird because I have a lot of artist friends, and a lot of them were kind of, shocked by that, because they assumed being able to conjure that mental image was a prerequisite for being an artist. So for me, when I have an idea for a comic strip, it might as well just be, words on a page. And I don't get to see what it looks like until I finish drawing it, And so every time when it's finished, there's an element of, wow, where did that come from? Where'd that really come from? And that never goes away. I've had that my whole life. Just getting to see what the idea that I had looks like by the time it's over. So when I finish, that's probably my favorite part. It always has been.
That's so cool. I had no idea. And I am also in the camp of like, wow, that's amazing that you were able to do the things that you do without having that visual image like to work from. Yeah. I think we probably have time for like one more question answer-y type thing. Okay. And since it's NCS, like National Cartoonist Society, like in the old world, this would be a thing where people would gather in person and then cartoonists would get to talk to each other, which before the internet was really rare and only really achievable in those situations. But have you found a community with cartoonists online? Like, do you have friends who do this and understand what you do? And like, what is that like for you? Because I know you don't necessarily live in one of the main cities that is full of cartoonists.
Honestly, there's a couple of guys that I can reach out to and bounce ideas off of and things like that. I've worked as a cartoonist pretty much in a vacuum my whole career, so I'm used to that. I'm a very awkward person, meeting new people and making new friends. It gets harder and harder every year. But the internet does facilitate me keeping in touch with a few people and just like, making social calls and things like that. But the last community that I was really a part of artists was probably back in 2004, 2002, 2004, when I was a member of there's a webcomic called Penny Arcade, and they had a forum attached to their site with a bunch of different categories. And one of them was the Artist Corner. And I joined the Artist Corner because I fancied myself an artist and thought I could go in there and show off to other people, and I actually made a lot of friends. Some of them I'm still friends with to this day. But yeah, that was the last time I really had a strong artist community where we just like kind of would compete with each other and celebrate each other's victories and things like that, And I still kind of keep tabs on some of those guys to this day. But yeah, mostly it's just me and my Netflix in my studio.
I mean, I think that we're all kind of doing versions of that in the current time. I picked up, I got takeout last night. It was a boring story, but I'll finish it out with a question that makes sense. But I'll tell this boring story first. And the guy at the restaurant was like, "How have you been? What have you been up to?" I'm like, "Yeah, I sit in my house and sometimes I order food and that's it." And so I feel like the pandemic is really impacting restaurant owners' ability to banter with their customers because we're not doing anything. So the last thing I want to ask and talk about, so we're gonna the plan is we're gonna launch Crabgrass into papers. How are you doing about that? How are you feeling?
I'll tell you what, I have to tell you that if I can go back to that sort of story that we mentioned earlier about when I submitted the comics to you and you contacted me, this was my concerted effort to try and make it in comics. And I had at the time no idea what that meant. The template before me was to be webcomics famous, to self-publish. That was the route now. Anytime anybody was talking about syndication or newspaper comics, it just kind of was that ship has sailed sort of attitude. And but I'm old enough that's kind of the newspaper comic artist is kind of the touchstone as far as my mental definition of what an official cartoonist is, So when I sent you those comic strips, I guess I was hoping that I would be able to run it on Go Comics, and then I'd also run it on Instagram and Facebook and wherever, and try to garner an audience and self-publish, run a Kickstarter at some point. So when you contacted me to see more, I thought, yeah, sure, I can crank out more of those. And then you contacted me for a call. I didn't know what to expect. So much thrown was I that when you actually, offered me a print contract, I don't think I understood at first initially what was happening. I thought, well, maybe this is some kind of weird second tier of Go Comics. And so I had to ask, is this what I think it is? You're like, yeah, dude, I could have sent you an email if we were just going to put it on Go Comics. And it was a moment of pure joy for me. It was just pure joy. I couldn't rationalize it away or downplay it in any way. It was just absolute pure joy. And I swear I can go back to that moment anytime in my head that I want to. Anytime that I want to feel good or really happy, all I have to do is go back to that moment. And it happens for me. So I could, if I had the body, I could backflip over it to this day. It's just, and it's so weird because I know how huge a deal this is. My wife knows how huge a deal this is. She couldn't be in proximity to me and not eventually understand how huge a deal this is, But it's also, it's not like I have a band and I got signed by a record label. It's not the sort of universal thing. I have fantasies of going to my high school reunion and telling everybody, yeah, I'm a nationally syndicated cartoonist now. No big deal, but they wouldn't care. So it's really weird for me to know how huge this is and to be really happy and really excited and really proud. I just wish everybody else knew that what a great thing it was, so that I could share it with more people. But most people that I'm in contact with are just as impressed by having a comic strip on the internet or in the newspaper as they are with having it in the newspaper. It's just a kind of a...
Well, I think the nice thing about this particular panel is most of the people who are watching it are probably going to have some sense of how cool and rare and awesome it is. So yeah, like sorry, microphones. So for people watching who want to check out the strip, it's online at gocomics.com/crabgrass, and it's going to be in papers. So ask your paper to get it if you want to see it in your paper, which you should, because it's really good. And I've been super excited to work with you on it, and I'm really excited that we got a chance to talk about it. And for those wondering why it's a shorter panel, it's because sometimes it's good to just do a little talk so you don't scare cartoonists away from doing talks in the future.
Right. We are 5 minutes over. Don't think I don't know it.
No, we're not, because we started, there was the intro bit where you met Jason, and now we're here. I've got an eye on the time. Don't worry, man.
My anxiety clock is ticking. It's just
You're totally, no, like this is literally my job. So anyway, thank you for doing this panel, and thank you people at home for watching it. And thanks to the NCS for hosting it.
Thank you.
What was that?